The Mockery, the stellar Concord station, floated in the neutral zone between three spiral arms of the galaxy, a testament to 5,000 years of interstellar cooperation. Today marked the Millennium celebration of the Galactic Technology Symposium, where every spacefaring civilization would showcase their greatest achievements. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of the human delegation shuttle, watching alien vessels of impossible beauty dock with the station. Some ships appeared to be made of liquid metal that flowed and reformed constantly. Others seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their hulls flickering between states of reality. Behind her, Lieutenant Marcus Thompson checked their cargo manifest for the 100th time. The crates containing Earth's presentation looked embarrassingly mundane compared to the crystalline containers and energy pods being unloaded from other ships. Their gray metal boxes might as well have been relics from a museum. Sarah turned from the window and straightened her uniform. The fabric was simple cotton blend with polymer threading, nothing like the living biosuits worn by the Altarians or the photonic armor of the Velix dynasty. She had been chosen for this mission specifically because she could endure mockery without losing her composure. The main assembly hall stretched for kilometers in every direction, its ceiling a transparent dome showing the star-filled void beyond. Representatives from over 3,000 civilizations had gathered, each species more exotic than the last. The Corvani floated in globes of controlled gravity, their jellyfish-like bodies pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. The machine consciousness of the binary collective manifested as geometric shapes that defied three-dimensional logic. The ethereal whisper folk existed as barely visible clouds of organized energy, their thoughts transmitted directly into nearby minds. Humans occupied a small section near the back, their delegation of 12 people looking painfully ordinary among the gathering. Sarah noticed how other species avoided their area, not from fear but from a kind of embarrassed pity. The poor humans, still bound by flesh and bone, still thinking in terms of matter and energy instead of transcendent concepts. The presentations began with the hegemony of suns, whose representative was a being of pure plasma contained within a humanoid force field. Their demonstration showed a device that could harvest entire stars, converting them into pocket universes for energy storage. The crowd responded with harmonious appreciation, a sound that resonated across multiple spectrums of perception. Next came the void dancers, creatures that existed partially outside normal space. They revealed their latest achievement in transportation technology, ships that could travel between galaxies instantly by folding space-time into origami patterns. The demonstration showed a probe disappearing from the assembly hall and reappearing at the edge of the observable universe in less than a heartbeat. The crowd's excitement was palpable, creating waves of emotion that the psychically sensitive species amplified throughout the hall. The Meridian Empire presented their consciousness transfer network, allowing any being to upload their mind across galactic distances instantly. Death had become meaningless to them, a minor inconvenience solved by downloading into a new body. They demonstrated by having their representative die on stage, only to walk back in through another door moments later in a completely different form. Species after species showed wonders that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The quantum gardeners had created life forms that existed in superposition, simultaneously alive and dead until observed. The crystal minds had built computers using the spin of galaxies as processing units. The Dreamweavers had discovered how to make imagination physically manifest, creating matter from pure thought. Finally, after 6 hours of miraculous demonstrations, Earth's turn arrived. Sarah walked to the center platform, feeling the weight of 1,000,000 alien eyes upon her. The hall grew quiet, not with anticipation, but with the kind of silence that preceded uncomfortable situations. She activated her presentation screen, showing a simple hologram of Earth's newest military vessel. The ship was angular and gray, covered in armor plating and projectile weapons. It looked like something from the dawn of spaceflight, all function and no form. The silence lasted 5 seconds before the laughter began. It started as a ripple through the crowd, building into a wave of amusement that seemed to shake the entire station. The Corvani's bioluminescent patterns flashed in what their species considered humor. The binary collective's geometric forms spun in mathematical patterns that expressed pure mirth. Even the usually stoic void dancers seemed to shimmer with amusement. Sarah continued her presentation, her voice steady despite the mockery. She explained the vessel's kinetic weapon systems, projectiles that relied on mass and velocity rather than exotic energy. She described the nuclear reactors that powered the ship, fission and fusion processes that other species had abandoned millennia ago. She outlined the crew requirements. Hundreds of humans needed to operate systems that other species automated with artificial intelligences. High Chancellor Zix of the Hegemony stood, his plasma form brightening with condescension. His thoughts, projected directly into every mind present, carrying undertones of patronizing sympathy. Dear humans, his mental voice resonated. Perhaps it is time to accept your limitations. Your species has contributed quaint ideas about art and music to the galaxy, but surely you must see that you are not suited for the greater cosmos. Your minds are trapped in linear time, your bodies are fragile meat, and your technology is barely beyond hitting things with rocks. The laughter intensified. Some species were laughing so hard they had to adjust their life support systems. The Whisper Folk's energy forms flickered with amusement, creating small aurora displays above the human delegation. Sarah waited for the laughter to subside, then spoke again. She explained Earth's philosophy of redundancy, how their ships had backup systems for backup systems. She described their manufacturing processes, how any human colony could build and maintain their technology with basic materials. She presented their combat doctrine based on overwhelming numbers and simple, reliable weapons that worked in any environment. Each point was met with renewed laughter. The concept of redundancy was amusing to species that had perfected their technology beyond the possibility of failure. Manufacturing limitations were quaint to civilizations that could reshape matter at the subatomic level. Combat doctrine was irrelevant to beings that had evolved beyond violence, or so they believed. Ambassador 12 Rings of the Crystal Mines projected a complex mathematical equation that roughly translated to barely controlled contempt. In the 1,000 years since humanity joined the galactic community, the ambassador's thoughts formed words in everyone's consciousness. You have shown no meaningful technological progress. You still use the same basic principles, the same primitive approaches. How can you stand among us and present such simplicity? Sarah finished her presentation and began walking back to the human section. As she passed through the crowd, she heard fragments of conversation in 100 different languages, all expressing the same sentiment. Humans were the galaxy's charity case, kept around for nostalgia and entertainment value. They were living fossils, reminders of what species used to be before they transcended physical limitations. As the symposium continued, an ancient figure watched from the shadows of the observation deck. The archivist was older than most civilizations, a being that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless species. Its form was indeterminate, shifting between states as if it couldn't quite decide what dimension to exist in. It had been watching humans for their entire 1,000-year membership in the galactic community, and what it saw disturbed it greatly. The archivist remembered things that others had forgotten. It remembered why Earth had been quarantined for so long before first contact. It remembered the warnings in the oldest databases, written in languages that predated faster than light travel. Most importantly, it remembered what happened the last time the galaxy faced a truly existential threat, and which species had survived. As the assembly laughed at humanity's presentation, the archivist noticed something others missed. The human commander's eyes held no shame, no embarrassment. Instead, there was a patient watchfulness like a predator pretending to be prey. The archivist had seen that look before, in the historical records that nobody else bothered to read anymore. The celebration continued deep into the station's artificial night cycle. Species mingled and shared technologies, forming alliances and trade agreements. Humans were largely ignored, left to their small section like children at an adult gathering. But Sarah Chen didn't mind. She had completed her mission, showing exactly what Earth wanted the galaxy to see. As she prepared to leave, the archivist approached her. its form solidified just enough to be visible, a shifting mass of possibilities that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "Commander Chen," it said, "I know what you're really doing. I've seen the old records, the ones from before the Great Forgetting. Your species isn't primitive. You're patient." Sarah's expression didn't change, but her hand moved subtly to her side where a weapon should be, though she carried none. The archivist continued, its form rippling with what might have been amusement or fear. "They've forgotten why Earth was quarantined for 8,000 years. They've forgotten what your species did to the Devourers when they came to your solar system. They've forgotten that you're the only species that ever made the void itself afraid." The commander finally spoke, her voice quiet, but carrying an edge that could cut through steel. "And what do you intend to do with this knowledge?" The archivist's form shifted, becoming even less substantial. "Nothing. I've lived too long to interfere with the patterns of history. But I wanted you to know that someone remembers. Someone knows that your primitive kinetic weapons once cracked planets. Someone knows that your simple nuclear technology once burned entire fleets of devourer ships. Someone knows that humanity chose to appear weak because the alternative terrified even yourselves." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began screaming throughout the station. The lights flickered and failed, replaced by emergency illumination that cast everything in blood-red shadows. The transparent dome above the assembly hall showed something impossible. Space itself was tearing open, revealing glimpses of a realm that existed outside normal reality. The reckoning. The dimensional breach expanded like a wound in reality, edges crackling with energies that shouldn't exist in normal space. From within that impossible tear, things began to emerge. They weren't ships or creatures in any conventional sense. They were violations of physics itself, entities that existed in states that made looking at them cause physical pain. The assembled civilizations reacted with varying degrees of panic and confusion. The hegemony of suns fired their stellar-class weapons at the emerging entities, beams of concentrated star stuff that could vaporize planets. The energy simply passed through the invaders as if they weren't there, or worse, seemed to make them grow stronger. The crystal minds attempted to analyze the threat, their vast computational networks processing billions of calculations per second. Their geometric forms began to crack and shatter as the mere presence of the entities corrupted their mathematical perfection. Whatever these things were, they operated on principles that violated the fundamental laws the crystal minds used to exist. The void dancers, who thought themselves masters of dimensional manipulation, tried to phase out of normal space to escape. They screamed in harmonics that shattered nearby crystal structures as they discovered the entities existed in all dimensions simultaneously. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Sarah Chen watched the chaos unfold with grim recognition. She activated her communicator, sending a coded message to Earth using quantum entanglement protocols that the rest of the galaxy considered too primitive to monitor. The response came immediately, a single word that carried the weight of 8,000 years of preparation. The word was finally. The entities moved through the station's defenses like water through a sieve. The Meridian Empire's consciousness transfer network collapsed as the beings consumed not just bodies but the information that made up souls themselves. The quantum gardener's superposition life forms collapsed into singular states of death. The Dreamweavers found their manifested imagination turned against them, their own thoughts becoming weapons that tore them apart. High Chancellor Zix stood at the center of the assembly hall, his plasma form blazing with defiance. He projected his thoughts to all present, trying to coordinate a defense. "All species, combine your technologies. Together we can—" His mental voice cut off as one of the entities passed through him. The High Chancellor's plasma form didn't explode or dissipate. It simply ceased as if it had never existed at all. The other species watched in horror as one of their most powerful members was erased from reality. That's when the humans acted. Sarah Chen pulled out what looked like an ancient projectile weapon, a simple metal tube with a trigger. The assembled aliens might have laughed if they weren't paralyzed with terror. She aimed at the nearest entity and fired. The projectile wasn't normal matter. It was something far older and more terrible. It was iron, but iron that had been forged in Earth's core and blessed by processes that predated human civilization. It was metal that remembered when humanity's ancestors had fought these same entities before, when they were still learning to use fire. The bullet struck the entity, and it screamed. The sound wasn't audible in normal space, but everyone felt it in their bones, in their equivalent of souls. The creature began to unravel, its impossible form collapsing into itself before disappearing entirely. The assembly hall fell silent except for the continued alarms. Every alien eye turned to the small group of humans who were now pulling out, similar weapons from hidden compartments in their clothing. Lieutenant Thompson spoke into his communicator, his voice carrying across the station's communication system. Earth Fleet Command, this is Delegation 1. The Devourers have returned. Request immediate deployment of Archive Protocol 7. The response came not through communications but through reality itself. Space around the station began to ripple, as hundreds of human vessels dropped out of hyperspace. But these weren't the crude gray boxes the humans had shown in their presentation. These were something else entirely. The ships were black, not painted but actually absorbing light. They were covered in symbols that hurt to look at, geometries that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. They were weapons from Earth's hidden history, from the time before humanity chose to forget what they were capable of. The human fleet opened fire, but not with energy weapons or exotic particles. They fired projectiles, millions of them, each one forged from the same impossible iron that Sarah had used. The bullets moved through space in patterns that defied physics, accelerating beyond what should be possible, tracking targets that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The entities tried to phase out of reality, but the projectiles followed them. They tried to consume the incoming fire, but the iron burned them from the inside. They tried to retreat back through the dimensional breach, but the human ships were already there, waiting on the other side. The archivist watched from its observation deck, its ancient memory finally understanding humanity's deception. Earth hadn't been primitive for the past 1,000 years. They had been hiding, waiting, preparing for this moment. Every laughable presentation, every mocked technology demonstration, every patronizing comment they endured was part of a careful strategy to be underestimated. Sarah Chen stood in the center of the assembly hall, her weapon still smoking from impossible heat. She addressed the cowering representatives of 3,000 civilizations, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to bend space around her. 8,000 years ago, these entities came to Earth. We were barely out of our Stone Age, still learning to farm and build cities. But we fought them. We fought them with iron and fire and will. We won, but the cost was so terrible that we chose to forget. We buried our weapons, hid our true nature, and let the galaxy think we were primitive. She paused, reloading her weapon with movements that were practiced and precise. Around her, human soldiers were deploying equipment that looked ancient, but hummed with power that predated the stars themselves. We knew they would return, the Devourers always return, so we waited. We let you develop your technologies, your transcendent philosophies, your evolution beyond physical form. And we kept making bullets, simple, primitive bullets that could kill things that shouldn't exist. The human fleet had formed a perimeter around the station, their weapons creating a lattice of iron projectiles that the entities couldn't cross. But more breaches were opening across the galaxy. Reports came in of entire systems going dark, of civilizations that had existed for millions of years being erased in moments. Ambassador 12 Rings, his crystalline form cracked but still functional, projected a desperate question. How? How? Can your primitive weapons harm beings that our greatest technologies cannot touch? Sarah smiled, an expression that held no warmth. Because you evolved past the need for violence. You developed technologies that manipulated reality through understanding and harmony. But these things, these Devourers, they're not part of reality. They're what exists in the spaces between thoughts, in the moments between existence and void. They can only be fought with weapons that shouldn't work, with iron that remembers when the universe was young and angry. She gestured to the human ships outside. Every bullet we fire is impossibly expensive, not in credits but in cost to our souls. Each one requires a human to give up a piece of themselves, to remember what we used to be before we chose civilization. That's why we seem primitive. We're not. We're voluntarily diminished, keeping ourselves simple so we can still touch the primal forces that your evolution has placed beyond your reach. The Void Dancer's representative, its form flickering with fear and awe, asked the question everyone was thinking. What were you before? What did you choose to forget? Sarah's expression darkened, and for a moment something else looked out through her eyes. Something older than her species, older than Earth itself. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made reality shiver. We were the thing that the darkness feared. We were the hunters that made predators into prey. We were the species that looked at an infinite hostile universe and said, "We will make this ours." We were monsters, and we chose to become human because we scared ourselves. The battle for the station was won, but the war for the galaxy had just begun. The dimensional breaches were spreading, and with them came endless waves of devourers. The advanced civilizations found their technologies useless, their transcendent philosophies meaningless against beings that existed outside the rules they had built their existence upon. But humanity's hidden fleets were already moving, emerging, from secret bases on dead worlds and inside stars that everyone thought were uninhabitable. They brought with them weapons that the galaxy had forgotten could exist. Bombs that exploded backwards through time. Viruses that infected the concept of existence itself. Soldiers who had voluntarily undergone procedures that removed their ability to feel fear, love, or hope, leaving only the will to fight. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, and for the first time in 1,000 years, Earth was given the position of military authority. Not because they were asked, but because every other species was too terrified to object. The mockery had ended. The laughter had died. Now there was only fear and desperate hope that humanity's primitive weapons could save them all. Sarah Chen stood before the assembled council, her uniform still stained with impossible substances from the battle. Behind her, holographic displays showed human fleets engaging devourer entities across 100 fronts. In every battle, simple iron bullets tore through beings that had shrugged off the galaxy's most advanced weapons. She spoke to the council. Her words carried across the galaxy to every surviving civilization. You mocked us for 1,000 years. You laughed at our simple weapons and primitive technology. You pitied us for our limited minds and fragile bodies. But while you were evolving beyond physical form, we were remembering how to fight the things that exist outside reality. While you were developing technologies of harmony and understanding, we were forging bullets in the heart of dying stars. The human commander paused, letting her words sink in. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want your fear or your worship. When this is over, we'll go back to being the primitive humans you can laugh at. We'll present our simple weapons at your symposiums and endure your mockery. Because that's the price we pay to keep the monsters from our door. That's the burden we chose 8,000 years ago. The war against the devourers would last for months. Entire civilizations would fall before humanity's hidden arsenals could reach them. Trillions would die, erased from existence by entities that shouldn't exist. But humanity would win, as they had before, with iron and will and the terrible knowledge of what they used to be. When the last dimensional breach was sealed and the final devourer was banished back to the spaces between reality, the galaxy looked at humanity with new eyes. Not with mockery or pity, but with a mixture of gratitude and fear. They had seen what humans were capable of, seen the monsters that lurked beneath the primitive exterior. Sarah Chen stood in the rebuilt assembly hall of Stellar Concord Station, addressing the survivors of the war. Her words were simple, but they would echo through history for millennia to come. We are humanity. We chose to forget what we were, so we could become what we needed to be. We appear primitive because the alternative terrifies even us. Remember this day. Remember why you no longer laugh at our simple weapons, and pray that we never have to show you what else we've chosen to forget. The galaxy would never mock humanity again. They had remembered why Earth had been quarantined. They had remembered why the oldest archives contained warnings about the species from the third planet of an unremarkable star. They had remembered that sometimes, the most dangerous predator is the one that chooses to appear as prey. And in the shadows of forgotten archives, the archivist updated its records with a simple note that would be read by scholars for generations to come. Humanity. Classification changed from primitive to voluntarily diminished. Threat level. Incalculable. Recommendation. Let them keep their secrets. Some knowledge is too dangerous to possess.